Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Victorian team at the Australian Institute of Architects, I'd like to warmly welcome you all today to Lean-In Session Mandatory Carbon Reporting is Coming. My name is Bonnie Herring, and I'm an architect at City Design Studio, City of Melbourne, and I'm co-chair of the Sustainable Architecture Committee and Victorian Chapter Councillor. It's my privilege to be your host and moderator today. And we're joining from across the country. I'd like to acknowledge with deep respect the traditional owners on the land we are meeting on. We recognise the privilege of standing on country and walking in the footsteps of those who came before us. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. A quick housekeeping note. Today's session is being recorded, so if you miss anything or want to take down more detail, the recording will be published on the Institute's YouTube channel in the coming days. We'll also share the link in upcoming email communication. This Lean-In format is designed for conversation. You'll have the chance to ask questions of our panelists, so if you'd like to contribute, please use the Q&A box below. I'll come back to your questions later in the session. Today's discussion explores mandatory climate reporting and has been organised in collaboration with Architects Declare. Together, we'll be looking to gain clarity on the evolving regulatory framework and practical strategies for compliance, explore how to integrate effective ESD approaches into our projects and our practices while meeting reporting obligations, and to stay informed and prepared for the changes ahead in our industry. We're fortunate to be joined by 3 subject matter experts and a special guest. We have Luke Fernandez. He's a founder of Practice Capital, a consultancy focused on helping professional practices embed sustainability as a business strategy. He draws on experience as a lawyer, educator, and business lecturer, and now works closely with firms on sustainability leadership, carbon management, and operational change. Julien Lecave is a business development manager at Pangolin Associates, a B Corp and leader in carbon management and climate risk, and with more than 25-year experience in sustainability. He advises across sectors, including architecture and construction, on ESG strategy, carbon reporting, and disclosure frameworks, such as the new Australian Sustainability Reporting Standards. And Anna Lindstedt is a senior architect and board member of Australian Architects Declare. She convenes a national group of regenerative designers and is recognised as a leader in sustainable regenerative design practice. We also have a special guest, Anthony Damasi, who's also a director of the Architects Declare Australia. And now to begin, I'm delighted to hand over to our first speaker, Anna Lindstedt.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. So on behalf of Australian Architects Declare and myself, I'd also like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. Today I'm joining in from Sydney, Gadigal country, and I respectfully acknowledge traditional owners of the land we meet on, past, present, and emerging. Next, please. Oh. So Architects Declare Australia's national network of over 1,200 architectural practices committed to addressing climate change and biodiversity through meaningful action, advocacy, and systemic change. We work to transform the practice of architecture and construction towards regenerative, low carbon, and ecologically restorative outcomes. And to support architects, we've developed a range of resources like Product Aware and guidance for practices to develop their sustainability action plans. Next slide, please. So many of you may know Product Aware is a free online database which now includes over 1,000 products and provides transparency around the environmental credentials of products. It's very easy to use. It's also easy for suppliers to actually input their information. Next slide, please. In particular, the database has some really good search parameters, which means you can easily search by the location of manufacture, certain certifications that you might require, and even compliance requirements like flammability index or slip resistance information if you need that. Next slide, please. So do check out our website. There's a lot of other tools and resources on there as well. The other thing that we do is, as part of our advocacy role, we organise events for knowledge sharing and to promote sustainable approaches to design and construction. And recent events include the Joint Product Aware and Suppliers Declare rollout of symposiums throughout Australia. There's been a really successful one in both Sydney and Melbourne, and there's one actually coming up tonight in Queensland. And then I think the next slide has some of those dates on them. And in actual fact, we don't have two in Queensland today. We've got another one in Tasmania on October the 29th. That was a mistake. I apologise for that. And we've been collaborating with organisations like Don't Waste Buildings, and just 2 nights ago we had a really fun collaboration with the Structural and Civil Engineers Association, where we had a bit of a debate, very lighthearted and lots of fun. Okay, next slide, please. Just a little bit of sort of housekeeping on our legal status. Architects Declare is a not-for-profit organisation, and recently in 2024, we achieved charity status. So next slide. And I just wanted there's a big one of the proof that we're officially a charity. And as a bit of a plug too, because we're a charity run by volunteers, we're always ready to collaborate, and we're always ready for donations too. So we hope these initiatives will assist architects in addressing the upcoming mandatory climate reporting. Next slide, please. There's a little link there which you can come back to if you're inclined to donate. Next slide, please. And this is my segue slide to hand over to Luke. This colourfully represents the rollout of the Group 1, 2 and 3 with regards to the climate reporting, which is coming in, which is the whole topic of this lean-in. And Luke and Julian will get into much more of the technical requirements to work towards this, but hopefully the Architects Declare resources will help also in heading in this direction. Over to you, Luke.
Thanks very much, and I'm very happy to be here to talk about this issue of great significance. So when I first started a conversation with Stefan Welsh about the ASRS earlier this year, I mentioned that it was notable that when most firms take on the daunting, some would say exhilarating, task of embedding sustainability, they do so from their own unique approach. You only have to look at the many presentations on the Architects Declare website. And while it's true that sustainability is driven through a company vision, we have national sustainability disclosure regulation in place, which is now worth reviewing if we are to align with the lay of the land and the low carbon economy unfolding around us. So my name is Luke Fernandez. I am the founder of Practice Capital. We work with professional practices and listed companies to embed sustainability as a business strategy. And in fact, we've been working with architects over the last 4 or 5 years. Today, I just wanted to share 6 insights that will give you a bird's eye overview of the ASRS before Julian takes us deeper into the nuts and bolts of the regulation. Slide. The regulation is part of a global regulatory movement. It's part of a coordinated global response to an environmental crisis at a critical point. The new sustainability disclosure laws marks the most significant change to financial reporting in Australia since the adoption of the IFRS in 2005. And can I say that finally, after the climate obfuscation, the COP impotency, and the immensely powerful fossil fuel lobbyist that seems to have been thwarting almost every effort in governmental climate policy, we are finally seeing a glimmer of hope that we the people, let's say, may be able to address the climate crisis through the force of regulatory intervention. And it's no longer the corporate social responsibility in the back room where many organizations just needed to show they were doing the right thing. The regulatory agenda now means that sustainability and climate need to migrate towards a core business imperative. And on this trajectory, there is hope. Critics will say that it doesn't go far enough, and with the financial materiality focus of the new regs, it's a far cry from what we need. But let's face it, it's a start, and perhaps a reasonable start. Slide. And it's really important to focus on the fact that these are financial disclosures. These are not standalone environmental laws. They are brought down by Treasury and the Australian Accounting Standards Board, the AASB. This is something that Australia has never seen before. Globally too, it's a new chapter, and many organisations, especially those not already reporting voluntarily, it's really going to be a steep learning curve. In the context of climate, this means that Australia's largest organisations must now disclose how climate risks and opportunities affect governance, strategy, resilience, and financial performance. Climate has officially migrated from being a sustainability issue to a financial reporting issue, and that is a marked difference. Slide. There are two parts to the regulation. Following their approval in September 2024, the Australian Accounting Standards Board released two critical standards. The voluntary AASB S1, that's the general requirements for disclosure of sustainability related financial information, and then the mandatory AASB S2, the climate related disclosures. The regs rightly are a climate first policy intervention, which is why the AASB S2 is mandatory. Biodiversity and broader ESG factors remain voluntary in S1 for now. But as we've seen with the shifting politics and intensifying climate impacts, that could change quickly. We've just seen the release of the long-awaited NCRA report, the National Climate Risk Assessment Report, and its dire assessment of what we can expect by 2050 and 2100 in Australia, environmentally, economically, and socially. I think Julian will have more to say on this, but we are on a 3-degree collision course. And let's just hope this will become a watershed moment. Slide, please. It's important to recognize that this isn't just about compliance. In the next 3 years, we'll see the unfolding of some of the most significant changes to the economy in recent history. The ASRS and the global counterparts, that is the IFRS sustainability standards, are mechanisms that shift corporate action towards climate and have the potential to shape and reshape markets. They can drive the creation of products and services aligned with social expectations, unlock new revenue streams, and enable smarter business strategies. It also demands new skills. Finance and risk professionals must build climate fluency. Sustainability professionals must learn the language of financial performance. And for architecture firms, this means upskilling in the areas of scenario analysis, emissions measurement, and climate risk integration into design strategy. And crucially, being able to translate these insights into client value, business resilience, and competitive advantage. Slide, please. And this isn't just about risk. The disclosures cover how environmental and climate-related risks and opportunities may affect an entity's financial performance, position, and strategy. So why opportunities? Well, the flip side of risk is opportunity. And when climate risk impacts every large project, there is a corresponding gain to be made in better design, in energy savings and future resilience. So I've listed a couple of examples there. I'm not sure if you can read them, but so passive house standards and high performance facades lead to reductions in operational energy demand, delivering long-term value for clients. Embedding water-sensitive urban design not only mitigates flood risks, but creates healthier, more livable spaces and increased asset values. Better material choices produces cost savings, procurement advantages, and reputational benefits. So in this way, climate-related disclosures are not only about demonstrating compliance, but they are also showcasing innovation, leadership, and competitive advantage through sustainable architectural design. Slide, please. And this is not just the big end of town. So in the next 3 years, we'll see the Australian economy transformed. The largest corporate entities in the land will mandatorily need to comply. There's 3 tranches scheduled in the next 3 years ahead. So by asset size, there's a couple of other criteria. So this year, the billion-dollar companies will go through. Next year, the $500 million+ companies will go through. And the following year, the $25 million companies plus will go through. But before you breathe a sigh of relief, even if you don't meet the thresholds, if you form part of the value chain of a larger player, you can vicariously be caught, because in determining their climate risk, larger corporates need to determine the risk in their value chain. So it's likely that you'll be hit with an information request, as it's called in tenders or within contractual terms. That will likely require your carbon emissions or perhaps even measures you're taking to address your climate risk and opportunities. It's interesting that once you include value chain, that is supplier exposure, it's likely that the majority of the Australian economy will be touched. Some working estimates suggest that up to 60 to 80% of GDP could be materially impacted. And if you can picture 3 years into the future, where the vast majority of the economy is climate reporting in some fashion, firms that continue to sit outside that ecosystem may very well be ostracized, face reputational, talent, and market access risk if they fail to align. So even the smallest or the most modest steps to align with the ASRS style expectations at this early stage can provide a competitive and reputational advantage just projected a few years out. And according to many reports, the vast majority of architects in Australia are the smaller micro firms employing 5 staff or less. So this is the scenario facing the vast majority of firms in Australia today. Slide. So the first question is, why would you align as a smaller firm? Well, as we've just said, if you're a supplier to a larger corporate or government department or other players having to report mandatorily, then you'll likely want to get across this. Lenders and investors are increasingly looking at climate risk indexed to cost of funds. It may be that your firm intends to assist clients in some capacity to comply with their ASRS responsibilities. Or there may be reputational issues, as we've said, where the whole world is moving and you are not, or if this becomes the perception. Prudent businesses are taking this on as a voluntary QA measure. Sustainability in 2025, particularly with the ASRS in place, is a QA measure because it connects your business with these realities that we are facing on a national and a global level, and that has financial, legal, and governance impacts. Slide, please. So the $6 million question is, what do we do? If you're a threshold company, of course, you will need to look at this sooner than later, and there are plenty of resources you can tap into. The guys like Pangolin, of course. We have industry partners like Carbon Halo and other groups like Climate Change Response, CCR, excellent data management platforms, and mandatory climate reporting specialists working with group 1 to 3 companies. But if you're a smaller firm, you can do any of these. You can, of course, assess your carbon, scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 gets more difficult. But then there's digging into climate risk and addressing risk and opportunities, the CROs as they're called. I think Julian has more to say about this. But if it's QA you're interested in, you can look at the ISOs. So ISO 14001 can support your ASRS reporting, but they are almost as much overwhelm as the ASRS to comply with. So I choose your battles there. There are other frameworks you can look at. I've listed there the VSME, which is a voluntary sustainability reporting standard for small and micro firms from the EU. We have a sustainability accelerator for architects launching next month, which means you can look at that to introduce your firm to this. It maps to the ASRS and other conventions that are significant for QA, which is not just focused on carbon. Sustainability more broadly is significant. We can get very carbon tunnel visioned as such. But biodiversity, waste, resource use is critical for firms to get across. The details are on our site if you're interested to learn more. That's practicecapital.com.au. That's the overview, 6 insights at this stage. Now I'll hand over to Julian, who will walk us through the practical mechanics of these standards themselves.
Thank you, Luke. So I'm part of Pangolin Associates. I'm the business development manager there. I've been there for about 4 years, but in climate change for 25 years. But we've got a team of about 35 staff at Pangolin Associates, and a lot of them principals, managers, and senior consultants, much more experienced than myself on the actual climate reporting standards. But I'll try to make it relevant and deliver some insightful information for you today. Next slide, please. So the purpose is to understand these new ASBS2 requirements. Next slide, please. Australia is really following up with the rest of the world. On Monday, Luke touched on that. There was the National Climate Risk Assessment and the National Adaptation Plan. So 2 very important reports, which we see at Pangolin as a turning point in climate policy. And I think talking about climate reporting today is more relevant than ever. And the federal government is about to unveil a new target for net zero by 2035, which we think will be anywhere between 60 to 70%. But we looked at, when we do climate scenario analysis, we look at 2 scenarios. One is 1.5 degrees increase of average temperature by the end of the century, which is following the Paris agreements. And then as consultants, we can test the infrastructure and assets of clients, and we determine ourselves a scenario. We can pick 2 or 3 or 4. But again, like Luke said, and what we can find in the report on Monday is that we're aiming at 3 degrees. May not sound a lot, but it's an average. So it could be more in some parts of the world. And it's a huge increase in terms of impacts. So we see now at Pangolin that it's a turning point for businesses and government. And we need to reframe risk and talk about climate resilience and really accelerate decarbonisation across all sectors in Australia. Next slide, please. So Luke touched on that. I'm here to talk about the mandatory climate reporting, S2. It really requires, and that's what we do when we help organisation Group 1 for now, is disclosing how climate change, human-induced climate change, is impacting companies, how their governance structure is in place to tackle climate risks, whether they're physical or transitional, what strategy they have or they are currently developing to tackle these opportunities, these risks and opportunities, what risk management framework they have in place. And of course, we talk about GHG, greenhouse gas metrics as well. which is one of the core business of Pangolin as well, is carbon accounting. So I think the main purpose is to indeed avoid greenwashing. You know, in 25 years in climate change, we've seen a lot of organizations talking about, you know, this long-term net zero target, but there's no modeling, there's no plan, there's no actions with abatement potential. It's just a number there, a bit of communication. So it's really about avoiding greenwashing, and it's really to provide investors with clarity and reliable information, data that's auditable and assurable about how companies will be impacted by climate change. And again, we're following up with the rest of the world. These type of legislations are already in place in New Zealand, in Japan, in China, in India, in parts of Europe and the US. So it's important that we as an economy are not left behind, like Luc said, even if we as a nation represent only 2 or 3% of world emissions. It's important that we attract the right capital. Next slide, please. So the 4 pillars of ASSB are here in front of your screen. It's interesting that about 25 years ago, sustainability was really managed by, you know, work, health, and safety sort of type of staff, and then you had a sustainability team that was standing on its own. And now we see that a lot of these disclosure requirements actually require organizations to put sustainability inside the financial team because it's a financial requirement. But when we help organizations to prepare for these disclosures, there's about 103 questions, detailed questions. We looked at these 4 key pillars, like I discussed before. So who is accountable for climate risk and opportunities in the business and how? So board structure, management oversight, that's your governance. How have you analyzed CRO, like Luc said, climate risk and opportunities in terms of the strategy? How does that impact the business model? How do you integrate risk, climate risk into the overall risk framework and processes, risk management, and then the metrics and targets? So that's your scope 1 and 2 emissions, and then your value chains emission, your scope 3. Provide the data, how it's been measured, and how do you plan to actually decarbonize on your scope 1 and 2? Do you have any targets, and how do you manage or how do you plan to reach these targets? So that's the 4 pillars, and that requires an organization like Pangolin Associates to have expert knowledge in both carbon accounting, but also governance and risk and strategy and financial modeling. So it is a complex piece of legislation, but it's certainly required at this point in time. Next slide, please. Anna touched on that. There's a rollout. If you tick any 2 of these two aspects of these thresholds, then you would have to report. So obviously Group 1 entities will have to report by the end of this calendar year or financial year 26. They know they have to report. Some of them are contacting us very late, but they all know that they have to report. They have over 500 staff or FTEs or $500 million revenue or $1 billion assets. So they are large organizations. Group 2, the following year, you can see that it's going to start impacting at least 800 entities in Australia, 250 staff or $200 million revenue. And then Group 3, just over 100 staff or employees with $50 million revenue or $25 million in gross assets. So that's interesting to see the rollout. And then you, part of the audience today, may be part of non-group entities, which Luc discussed as well. And you may be called by the trickle-down effect, where some of your larger clients or suppliers are asking you to disclose at least some of your GHG metrics, your scope 1 and 2, or maybe some of your exposure to climate risks, transitional and physical. Next slide, please. So we look at emissions reporting, which is about probably 20% of the 103 disclosures. So at least starting to prepare collecting data on your scope 1, that's your direct fuel usage or direct greenhouse gas emissions, and your scope 2, that's your electricity usage, that you may want to start collecting and measuring in terms, of your Australian operations as an organizations. Very important. Climate risk and opportunities, like Luke said, the Treasury really want Australian organization to look at opportunities as well, and not just risks, but to look at resilience and adaptation to the impacts of physical human-induced climate change and the transitional risks as well. And I'll touch on what these transitional risks may look like in the future. But also SMEs must meet customer specification and standards. And like Luke said, we can see more and more organizations asking us for advice on how to answer specific questions that they find in tenders or RFQs, some requirements around decarbonization, traceability, circularity, and emissions offsetting requirements. So it's a complex piece of legislation, but the aim is really to decarbonize, to seize opportunities in the future, and to disclose that information honestly and in a transparent manner, especially for investors. Next slide, please. I was able to identify some large architectural firms in Australia that have more than 100 FTE, full-time equivalents. So some of you may be working in those organizations, or you may know some of these organizations. And depending on their revenue and their assets, but I would suspect mostly the revenue, then these organizations may be falling into group 3. So they may have to start reporting in 2 or 3 years. So very important to prepare, especially around greenhouse gas emissions. Like Luke said, a lot of architectural firms are smaller entities, but I think in a low carbon future, it's important that you as architects look at solutions for your clients in terms of solar passive design, embodied carbon, operational carbon, and material use as well. Next slide, please. So mandatory climate reporting is a legal requirement. Companies must disclose climate-related risk and opportunities, and that's under the Corporation Act. These disclosures must be audited. It's an extension of financial reporting to ASIC. They are rolled out, like we talked about, in terms of company size, but there will be a flow-down effect to the supply chain. The focus is on climate risk and opportunities, but also emissions as well, about 20%. And it's based on global standards, global accounting standards as well, the Accounting Standards Board, ASSB. So it matters to you because even if you don't report directly, you'll be, like Luke said, impacted through your value chain. So large organizations may require your data to meet their own reporting obligations. And for example, when we do modeling at Pangolin Associates for large organizations, and an organization have a desire to be net zero by 2050, we looked at their scope 3 emissions as well. So that's the emissions of their smaller suppliers. So that's your scope 1 and 2. So if they have a desire to net zero, to decarbonize over the next 2 or 3 decades, then they want to work with organizations like yours who have the same goals as well, and we can provide that modeling with actions that have abatement potential. So as a supplier, you will be caught into that sort of efforts to decarbonize and to report. Financiers and investors, of course, want clarity on where they invest and in terms of climate risks in funding decisions. And of course, governments, public entities have reputational risks, and they have expectations, and they need to shift towards low carbon emissions business types. So the standard provide also good guidance for SMEs for their own voluntary reporting as well. Next slide. Thank you. Again, here we've got the 4 pillars of governance, strategy, risk, and greenhouse gas metrics and targets. So there's 103 disclosures, and all of them are around governance, strategy, risk, and targets. So the organizational governance around climate-related risk and opportunities, the actual and potential impact of climate-related risk and opportunities on the organization itself and its strategies and financial planning over the years. So we do have financial planning modeling capabilities at Pangolin Associates to look at the financial impact of such risks and opportunities, and how the overall risk management processes in the organization is looking at climate risks. Next slide, please. Typical example of disclosures there. We've put 7 disclosures on the governance, but the responsibilities for the chief risk officers, the skill and competencies of your chief risk officers, how often they review risks and opportunities, and the strategy and target setting, and who, the delegation system and controls in place. They're very specific questions. Around risks, we've put, there's 8 disclosures there that talk about the parameters, talk about scenarios as well, and risk identification, how you monitor those risks, and the processes in place and the updates year on year. The opportunities as well, how you monitor opportunities, and how do you include that in decision making, and how do you integrate climate risks into the overall management processes. In strategies, about 46 disclosures, and around business model and value chain, climate response and planning, financial impacts, and climate resilience. Around greenhouse gas metrics and targets, of course, disclosing your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, the changes year on year, and the location of your sites, the scope 3 categories, where do you spend money in your supply chain and where those emissions come from, and potentially your financed emissions as well, if you're an investor with a portfolio of investments. But there's other CRO-related metrics as well, vulnerable to transition risks. How do you look at internal carbon pricing? When do you review your targets? And what sort of carbon offsets do you use as well? If you have to rely on carbon offsets, what's their co-benefits, where they're coming from, are they highly impactful, etc. Next slide, please. So there's a few key government and regulatory bodies that are involved in that rolling out of these legislations. There's the Parliament, of course, who passed legislation last year, but there's the Australian Accounting Standard Board as well. There's the auditing standards, and there's ASIC, indeed, who will have, they will be checking the reporting every year, and they will be issuing fines if they can't see or inspect the records of the companies. So it's one thing to disclose and to lodge a climate or sustainability report next to your financial report, but you're going to have to actually show records, meetings, minutes, board meetings, and modeling targets to prove that your disclosures are correct and not misleading. So there'll be a direct approach for corrective disclosures, infringement notices, and potentially civil penalty proceedings as well. Next slide, please. Just another slide on the rolling out and the timeline of ASSB S2. You can see that we are now helping organizations preparing for their climate report, which is some of them are due at the end of this calendar year or financial year in June next year, and then in 27 and 28. So there'll be assurance, limited assurance for the next 3 years, and then reasonable assurance as well for these data and disclosures. Next slide, please. That's another slide on the audit ramp-up requirements. So we at Pangolin will not be delivering full assurance because you need to be a financial auditor, but we can certainly look at pre-assurance as well for our clients. So organization will have to use financial auditors for their reports to be assured in limited or reasonable manner. And when we talk about assurance, we mean strategy, governance, risk, and metrics and targets. Next slide, please. Just to touch on your scope 1, 2, and 3, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with scopes when we talk about where the greenhouse gas emissions come from, especially in architecture and construction. We think about scope 1 for fuel usage, for example, a fleet of cars, diesel generators, but also your electricity in construction or in office, for example. So these are your scope 1 and 2, which is scopes that you control directly, you own, and you can start collecting data on and measuring the CO2 equivalent and look at how you can model a decarbonization there with switching to EV or other clean technologies, purchasing green power. The scope 3 is a bit more difficult to measure and collect, but that's also required as we decarbonize the value chain and the supply chain, which includes pretty much everything else on your general ledger, everything that you buy as an organization to run the business, which include business flights, but IT services, accounting services, advertising, and all your goods and services that you purchase through your value chain. And larger organizations who have a net zero target by 2050 should include their scope 3. So that's your 3 scopes there. Thank you. Next slide. More on the GHG or greenhouse gas emissions requirements around scope 3. The first 2 coming years are focusing on scope 1 and 2, but from 27 and 28 onwards, there'll be audit requirements on scope 3, value chain of large organizations. That's where you may be caught as a small architectural firm or medium size, where your scope 1 and 2 is actually the scope 3, if that makes sense, of your larger clients. So, build, land lease, large construction firms, your scope 1 and 2 will be their scope 3, so they may ask you to disclose your scope 1 and 2. And that will need to be audited as well. So when we measure, and we've been measuring carbon accounting for the past 15 years in Australia and overseas at Pangolin Associates, we have to follow international greenhouse gas protocols, other ISO standards, climate active standards when we measure and calculate scope 1, 2, and 3 for our clients. So these methodologies, the emission factors that we use every year needs to be updated. What you include and exclude in your inventory needs to be disclosed. And if you have gaps in data, then you have to list assumptions, and all of that need to be properly recorded for future audit requirements. Next slide, please. Audit reporting emissions is indeed important. Like I said before, I'll try to be quick on that slide. There's international standards that you need to follow, whether you do it yourself or use a company like us or software solutions. We work with ANGER organization who have to report on the ANGER as well, the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme for big emitters. But even as a small or medium-sized enterprise, you risk of losing contracts, like Luc said, or have reduced competitiveness in tenders if you don't report your emissions correctly in the medium to long term. Next slide, please. I'm just conscious of time. Climate risk and opportunities. We help organizations to identify physical risks. So in Australia, and you can see the latest 2 reports published on Monday, there's a lot of risks, obviously. We tend to focus on about 10 risks, mostly around bushfires and heat waves. You can imagine how heat waves can impact on the workforce in the construction industry and slow down the pace of construction as we have more days over 30 or 35 degrees in the future. But we look at coastal surges as well, and flooding and rising sea level as well, and other types of physical risks, and how these risks impact on the assets and the value chain and supply chains of organizations. Transitional risks are more in regards to shift in policy changes. For example, the European Union putting a price on carbon on imports, what we call CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which may impact a large Australian export organization to the EU markets. So that's a typical transitional risks, for example. And of course, like Luke said, we look at climate opportunities, if there's any opportunities for new products and markets to be gained, or efficiency to be gained in terms of supply chain or business strategy. Next slide, please. Just a quick slide on director's duty. So most of you today are probably not required to report on mandatory climate reporting, but larger organizations that you work for, their directors have signatory requirements. They must sign off the climate-related disclosures that we prepare for them, that will be lodged with their financial report, so that they have, to confirm that the information provided is accurate, complete, and complies with the standard, and it's auditable. And they've got a duty of care, those company directors, CEOs and CFOs, in accordance with the Corporation Act of 2001. So they have to demonstrate that they have taken appropriate steps to assess the materiality of climate risks and their potential financial impact on the company. Failure to address could result in personal liability, regulatory scrutiny, and reputational harm for directors and companies. Next slide, please. Some new challenging elements of MCR disclosures. I'll be quick there, but some challenges that we can see in the market is that many organizations poorly understand the impacts of climate on businesses. There's still organizations who don't understand the difference between being carbon neutral or having net zero targets, which is very different. There's physical risks that are not considered properly, and there's also beyond short term to consider limited scope as well. And again, we need to collect data and store the data so that this information is auditable and traceable, so that you can support evidence when you disclose. So there's a need, and we do that with organizations, to set up a system of records of all that data and focus on credible references and science-based frameworks as well. So these are some challenging elements of this new legislation. Next slide, please. I'll have to stop very soon. ASIC will be focusing on greenwashing, like I said before, and there'll be some corrective disclosures and infringement notices as well. I've put a few links at the end of that presentation as well, that you guys can have a look at, on how to avoid greenwashing when offering products and services. And we do help organizations as well in that regard, on how to communicate so that it's not perceived as greenwashing. What can you say? What should you not say if you're not actually modeling properly your targets? Next slide. That's it. Appendices. Happy to share some resources. Next slide, please, on some very useful links there from ASIC. Pangolin Associates deliver lots of webinars as well all year round for free. You just have to register. And there's links as well there from the Treasury Policy Impact Analysis and ASSBS2 standard that you can have a look at. And I think the Australian Institute of Company Directors has some interesting resources as well. I think I'll stop there because the other slides at the end here are around our framework and how we work with clients. So happy to share that if you guys are interested. And then there's other examples of climate risk and opportunities in the context of human-induced global warming. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julian. That was a fantastic, very thorough and great presentation. There's a lot of information to digest, but maybe we'll all, the speakers might like to join us on screen for a little bit of a Q&A. If anyone's got any further questions for the speakers today, pop them in the Q&A box. I definitely have a few. We've been discussing it amongst the speakers. You know, architects and others joining online today are already occasionally overwhelmed with the amount of reporting and other kind of regulatory frameworks we've got to navigate, the National Construction Code, various authorities, our clients' needs. Any tips and tricks on how to avoid that kind of impending overwhelm of all of this, or perhaps some templates? Maybe I'll throw that to Luke, actually. With your business background, I feel like you might offer a clear path.
It's thanks, Bonnie. It's a very interesting question, I guess. The truth of the matter is, I don't think it's going to get easier, and that's the short-term view, I think. I mean, you've got the ASRS, which is just another layer of complexity on top of course, your neighbours and your NAITHs and NCCs and Green Stars and all sorts of other compliance requirements. And I think the small firms particularly feel there is this compliance fatigue that's going on. Look, it's interesting. I have a client, I was speaking to him, just an architect client last week, and he was saying it feels like he's swimming in an ocean of sustainability acronyms and bobbing up and down, seeing the security of sustainability terra firma on land, but can't quite get there. And then there's this wash over the SDGs and now the ASRS. It does get a bit much, but I think a longer term view, it may get easier in the sense that the ASRS is supposedly going to unify a lot of the various reporting frameworks. So that is, I guess, a long-term view. In the short term, I think it's a matter of, if you have a big swim ahead of you, it's really important to mentally approach this in the right way. And I think that's more the case than anything else. Really look at the easiest ways that you can absorb this stuff. There's a lot of resources out there. I think the crucial thing to understand is, of course, this is not business as usual. We are in crisis, and we need to, I guess, perform from that mentality. And if we can think, look, there's a lot of things that we need to focus on. Let's just be strategic and focus on the quick wins. Try to get resources into your system as quickly as possible, and try to take small steps. I think that's the main thing.
Something that might be on a positive note, for those practices that have actually embarked on their sustainability action plans, and that means different things for different practices. But there's that thing about you can't get anywhere unless you set a target or a goal. And a lot of practices have set goals already. And I think that's a good first step. And then plus you can sort of use it for marketing. And I think the point about being part of a value chain, possibly triggering this, is very compelling as a sort of, get people to speed up this journey.
Julian, maybe I wonder if you might like to add something.
Thank you. I think we were pitching to a large construction firm, and one of the terms that we used the other day was about, building resilience. And so I guess if I was an architect, I would, of course, you have to try to be competitive in terms of cost, but looking at how to build something that's going to be resilient to future climate extremes. And second, looking at your material that you use in the construction, so that you actually have a decreased operational carbon over the lifetime of the building, which will help for organization in terms of their scope 1 and 2.
We've only got a couple more minutes, but I have one burning question, which is around how we can use this reporting to help drive better and more sustainable outcomes. Often ESG can be packaged by designers cleverly back to our clients as this is what it looks like to realize some of the targets that you're saying, and sometimes that can be a big challenge. Could the reporting be used in this way, assuming it's public? Maybe, Julian, do you have some thoughts on that?
Sorry, how the report can be used for better ESG strategies? Is that what you're saying?
For better architecture. I'm curious
sorry.
about how we can use it as designers to help realize or give vision to what these organizations are purporting to be targeting.
Well, again, that's right. The most larger construction firms or government entities have to decarbonize very quickly. And so the challenge is both the technology challenge and also the adaptation challenge, and how we organize society, how we see buildings, how we look at buildings, what's the purpose of a building. So I think there will be requirements for smaller architectural firms to start measuring the scope 1 and 2, but also maybe to help these larger entities to design buildings that have lower carbon impact and that, again, are built in a way that will be more resilient to future climate impacts, if that makes sense. So it's a bit of a repetition of what I said before, but certainly the legislation requires more transparency in ESG. So you can say goodbye to greenwashing, basically.
As architects, I think we really need to embrace treating the environment as a key stakeholder in all of our design processes. Sorry about the background noise there. That's my mom.
It's a really, really important point to end on. Thank you so much for that, Anna. And thank you to all of the panelists for your time today. Luke Fernandez, Julian Lacave, Anna Lindstad, thank you for your time. Really going to chew on this for a while, I'd say. Just a reminder that the lean-ins are recorded to view later. You can receive notifications on when the new lean-ins are available to view by subscribing to the Australian Institute of Architects YouTube channel. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you. We're right on time.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye-bye.